And now, for a political roundup of the latest news from the White House and Congress, please welcome members of the Atlantic's politics team: Ashley Parker, Toluse Olorunnipa, Ann Applebaum, and Tom Nichols. Here to lead the conversation is the Atlantic staff writer, Jonathan Lemire.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for being with us. It is just basically a staff meeting here. We're glad you can join us for this session titled Trump's Return. Tom Nichols, Robert Redford's death this week had me watching The Candidate. And famously, at the end of the movie, after he wins, in a surprise, he looks around and says, "What do we do now?" That was the case for Donald Trump in 2017. That's not the case this time around. He clearly had a plan. Are you surprised at all by just how assertive and aggressive he has been on so many different fronts?
No, but I think it's somewhat misleading to say that he had a plan. I think he ran primarily because of his personal troubles, wanted to stay ahead of prison, a lot of other things that were chasing him, but this time, the people around him were well prepared, and they had a plan, and they wrote it down. This wasn't like a secret, kind of folder that was hiding in a think tank somewhere. It was not just the Project 2025 stuff at Heritage. It was a whole group of people saying, when he comes back in, these are the things we're going to do. And I think, in a strange way, the only real obstacle to that has been Trump's lack of direction himself. He gets sidetracked very quickly. He's been, gotten all bunched up with the Epstein business. But I'm not surprised at how fast they moved, because for a year before they came back into office, all of them around him were telling us exactly what they were going to do.
So Ashley, sort of same idea to you. You covered day in the first term each and every day, then with the Washington Post. Talk to us about how this time around, though, it's different. We'll get to the journalism of it, but the different approach from the West Wing.
Yeah, it's incredibly different. Just from this time, the first time, he didn't really expect to win, and his first race was for president, and he won. And so, in order to staff his White House, he had to look to a lot of traditional Republicans and old hands who were not sort of true MAGA, were not loyal to him. This time, all of those people have been cast out, fired by tweet in his first term, right? And so he has true loyalists with him now. True believers. And I also think that in those 4 years that he and a lot of these people were out of office, they used that time to learn. I mean, some of it was what Tom said, which was, kind of writing these policies that they are implementing now, right? They had 4 years for Stephen Miller to think creatively about what's the obscure statute I could use to deport people to Uganda. So they were preparing in that way. But also, people forget, because it was such a brief period of time, but after January 6th, there was a sense that he was left for political dead, that not only would he not be president again, but that the Republicans wouldn't want to have anything to do with him. And so in the way that he came back, he also came back sort of like, the velociraptors learning how to use the door handles, right? Like stronger, bolder, better, and more emboldened. In the first term, there were people around him who he would want to do something, and they would say, you can't do that because that's illegal, or because you'll face too much blowback, or because that's not how it's done. And this time, in reporting on him, I talked to someone who said, we have a rule in the White House. If the president asks for something twice, we do it. And they said, the first time he does ask for some crazy shit, so we make him ask again. But if he asks a second time, you can't replace the entire board of the Kennedy Center. It's how can we make this happen? And that is such a different feel than the first term.
And totally, that's just to that point. There are no guardrails. There are no adults in the room. There's no holdover Republicans. There is no James Mattis or John Kelly or H.R. McMaster, who spoke here yesterday, this time around. There are people whose sole qualification in many ways is simply they will say yes.
He has surrounded himself with yes men, but even if he hadn't done that, he is, as Ashley said, so emboldened that he is willing to push back past those guardrails. He's really exposed how much of our system is based on things like shame and history and honor and things that aren't written in law and things that you can't get the Supreme Court to rule on, and things that are based on tradition and what past presidents have done. And Trump has come in saying, my ideal is to blow up those systems, to blow up the orthodoxy that past presidents have done, because in his telling, all of those past elite figures that have led our country have led to the forgotten man and woman being forgotten and being downtrodden and suffering. And in his telling, he needs to blow all of that up by doing things in a different way. Plus, he has all of the animosity towards his political enemies from being prosecuted, from, in his mind, having the 2020 election stolen from him, and he actually does believe that in many ways, even though it's not true. And so he believes that he can go after his political enemies, use the full force of the government to attack his political enemies, and a number of his voters, that's what they want from him. One of our colleagues wrote about the cruelty being the point. This time it's supercharged because a lot of his voters want him to enact those kinds of policies that will harm or hurt their political enemies or the people that are on the other side of the aisle.
The idea that shame is part of the equation. More than one Trump advisor has told me that one of his real superpowers is his utter lack of shame. That's just not going to be a factor here. And Tolu led us perfectly to the next topic here. This time around, part of it is also revenge. He said it's retribution. And we have seen him target his political foes, or people he believes to be his political foes. And he's also been remarkably effective. And weigh in, give us your analysis here as to just the degree of how effective he has been bringing his opponents to heel, whether it's universities, law firms, media organizations.
So I would say, first of all, when we talk about why people are working for him this time, I think January 6th plays a really important role. So January 6th was an attack on the US political system, and it repulsed a lot of people. But some people said, that's exactly what I want. I want someone to be president who will destroy the system. I hate the system and I want it destroyed. And that meant that people actually from even different parts of the political spectrum, RFK Jr., J.D. Vance, Peter Thiel, people who had different reasons to dislike the way the American political system works, all backed him. And so the nature of the beast is changed for that reason. I mean, you actually have a team of people. It's not just that they're effective, and by the way, I don't think they are always all that effective, but they have a clear goal, and the goal is the destruction of the system as it is. And then sometimes I think they have a different end games. And when we see them come into conflict, it's because of that. I mean, so the whatever we're calling them, the techno-fascists and the MAGA people and the other parts of the coalition don't always agree on exactly where they're going, but they all agree on the piece of destruction. So, I mean, the effectiveness, though, hasn't really come from them being so amazing. I mean, on the contrary, they make enormous mistakes all the time. The effectiveness has come from the amazing level of fear that exists in the highest levels of the United States. I mean, CEOs who are billionaires. I mean, what's the point of being rich if you can't say, I'm not doing that? I mean,
there's a term for that kind of money.
I'm not going to say it on this genteel stage, but if you can't say, anyway.
Well, if you're Jeff Bezos and you say, I have $1 zillion and I own a newspaper, you should be afraid of me.
You should be afraid of me. And that was what happened the first time, actually. But it's also, it's the tech companies, it's banks, it's all kinds of people. I mean, the tariffs alone are a disaster for huge numbers of U.S. companies, companies that make stuff. Because even if you make cars or whatever in the United States, you're still importing little bits of steel or screwdrivers from somewhere else. And so all of your costs have just gone up. And so, and yet there's been this omerta, they're afraid to say anything and so on. And so the cowardice of the business class has surprised me, and the cowardice of basically the Republicans in the Senate.
Yeah.
And so it's not as if there's generalized guardrails failing. It's very specific. There's a specific guardrail which has failed, which is Congress. When the Republican Party the Congress is supposed to make decisions about tariffs. Tariffs are taxes. They're to do with money. Congress decides about money in our system, and they've decided to just let the president do it. And so you can actually point to the specific groups of people, and it's not actually large numbers of people. who appear to be cowardly or cowed or afraid, and that's the difference.
Staying with you, that compliance, that fear, you are one of the leading authorities on what it looks like when a democracy sort of slips away. How familiar is this? It
is textbook. I mean, I know Americans like to describe themselves as exceptional, and we are actually exceptional. I mean, it's a very unusual nation, and it came together in an unusual way. And there are, many specificities of our history and so on, and people like to focus on, I don't know, the period before the Civil War, Reconstruction, or whatever, to explain where we are now. But actually, the pattern of what they're doing is familiar from Hungary, it's familiar from Turkey, it's familiar from India, it's familiar from Russia, it's familiar from the Roman Republic. When the Roman Republic fell and Caesar took over, the same emotions and the same arguments were swirling around. And when the founders of the United States wrote the American Constitution, that's what they were reading. Actually, they were reading the history of the fall of the Roman Republic because that's what they were afraid of. That's one of the reasons why we have our somewhat weird constitution, was because they were trying to prevent Caesar from coming to power. So this is not just recent, familiar in recent history. It's familiar, going back a couple thousand years.
And actually, certainly enshrined in the sort of founding principles of this country is the idea of free speech. But we have seen in the wake of Charlie Kirk's assassination a very different approach from not just the FCC chair, but from the White House. And we have heard from the vice president, we have heard that the idea that they're going to crack down on left-leaning NGOs or other groups that they feel, without evidence, was a part of that terrible assassination, that we have heard from the president himself deeming Antifa a terrorist group, which potentially would allow him to take extraordinary measures. But this has been, the Kirk death may be an excuse to do it, but some of this has been in the works for a while.
Yeah, absolutely. The going after NGOs, I mean, I was reminded when he did designate Antifa as a terrorist organization that was something he wanted to do in his first term. So a lot of these ideas were seeded. I mean, I do think there's just such a central irony that part of Charlie Kirk's thing was he was a free speech absolutist. He would go on to college campuses, he would debate, he engaged in a lot of speech that a number of people thought was truly abhorrent, but he would defend, and the administration would defend, and conservatives would defend, and liberals would defend his right to say it. And now it is just a complete 180. And to see Republicans and conservatives who, for instance, fought vociferously for instance, the right of a baker to refuse making a wedding cake for a gay couple, now trying to cancel or punish someone who, for the same principled reasons, didn't want to print out flyers about Charlie Kirk's memorial. It feels like a bizarro world.
And Tolu, it seems like one of the some of Trump's approach here, as we've been talking, is sort of scattershot, but one of the sort of real through lines here is an attempt to expand executive power. And they're getting very little pushback from a supplicant Republican Congress. The Supreme Court largely has been giving them a green light on most things. But that is what this. It's an approach where they throw a lot of stuff on the wall. They know it's not all going to work, but more of it is sticking, frankly, than I think some of them anticipated.
Exactly, and we often talk about how Trump is ideologically malleable. He's not necessarily a conservative's conservative. He doesn't care about a lot of the policy stuff, but one of the things he does care about is power and being able to wield power, being able to have other people come and cow to him, whether it's members of the media, whether it's members of the elite that, in this city did not give him a lot of attention when he was trying to build buildings. And now he is president and he wants people to know that. He wants people to know that he can do whatever he wants. He wants other countries to come and kiss the ring, otherwise get tariffs. A lot of what we see out of this presidency, out of this White House, is playing to the politics of power. And we have seen that the guardrails that we thought we had around a president, around a White House, with a Congress that would stand up and say, no, you can't do that. No, we will stop you from doing that. We'll pass something with a supermajority to stop you from expanding power beyond the line that is supposed to be the line for Congress and the Article I powers that we've had for generations. they're now sort of rolling over and saying, do whatever you want. And once Congress rolls over, I think there's that domino effect that you see businesses say, oh, if the Senate's not going to stop him from doing it, why should I not cut a deal and give him 10% of my company? Because, the conservatives that typically I could rely on to stand up and say, we're not going to allow you to do this anti-conservative thing of taking over a company that's in the private sector. Nobody's saying anything in the Senate, and now you're seeing companies come one after the other and kiss the ring and do these deals that would never have been done in the past. And Trump loves that. He loves the idea that he is expanding power. He doesn't care about the traditions. He doesn't care about what's been done in the past. He doesn't care about the conservative values that past presidents have used to stop them from doing certain things, even though it would have been nice to take over the Kennedy Center or a university or get a company to give you $10 billion just because you say so and because you're president, or get Qatar to give you a jet. He's doing all these things because he can, and it's expanding his power, and that is the through line of his presidency.
And Tom, another area where he's expanding his power recently is with military action. You've got a news story on The Atlantic. It's leading your app right now, but you can wait till after this to read it. Don't pull out your phones. About the strikes, targeting Venezuela gang members. At least that's the pretense there. Talk to us about what do you actually think is going on here?
I think, first, I think the president doesn't really care about drugs or crime or, the kind of rationalization for putting troops in the streets or blowing up boats. Some of it is just this performative strongman stuff. And I think, going back to the theme that you all were talking about and was mentioning about fear, we've sort of lost our self-confidence as a society to kind of laugh at him at times, to say, the Department of War, you're going to rename it the War, that's just stupid. It's just inane. But this is a way of reminding people, no, I can actually use force. Don't laugh at me. Don't underestimate me. The military, and I think he really wants to establish this, the U.S. military is my personal militia. It answers to me, not to the people of the United States. It is everything George Washington feared about what the U.S. military could become. I think the other thing, he wants the military out and about in American cities because he wants to get people used to that. He wants to acclimate us to getting used to saying, well, on election day, there are troops in the streets. Well, they've always been here. They've been here for months. So there's a kind of frog boiling that's going on here. I also think it's a much more sinister project to say, with the Venezuelan boats in particular, or whatever boats they are, because we don't know, because they're in little pieces in the ocean now, to say, I can unilaterally declare groups and people terrorists and then kill them. And by the way, I've just declared a whole bunch of Americans to be terrorists too. And let people draw their own conclusion from that. This is very purposive behavior. And again, I'm always loath to imbue Trump with too much strategic thinking of any kind, but the people around him have clearly thought this through. Ashley's point about they've had 4 years to think about how to use this, how to get around, putting the military out there. This time there isn't anybody there's no, Mark Milley or Jim Mattis or anybody else saying, Mr. President, it's a bad idea, don't do that. And I think that this flexing of military muscle is to reestablish that sense of fear, performative behavior as a strongman, but also to get American citizens used to the idea that the military is this Praetorian force that answers only to the president.
Though I will just add to your point. I agree with what I said about the people around him having 4 years, but one thing, and we both covered, the three of us covered the first Trump administration, and especially when Trump was first president, Trump would do something that made no sense, right? And our editors would be like, is he playing 4D chess, right? Did he say this, so McConnell will do this, and then Schumer, and the answer is no. Yeah. And I think of a quote that an anonymous aide said that when they were asked, it had to do with pardons, but they said, no, he's just eating the puzzle pieces. And so I think one thing to keep in mind, which I still think is my North Star in covering him, I'm curious what you guys think, is that he's a consummate host and showman and deal maker, and he is always trying to get through the minute, the hour, the day, the week, and he is trying to win over whoever is directly in front of him. And that can be confusing, and it will make him say things that don't make sense and are in contrast with each other because, for instance, he'll bring, as he did in his first term, he'll bring the Dreamers into the Oval Office, right? And he'll be talking to the Dreamers. He's trying to win over the Dreamers, and he'll say, "You're the best among us. You were brought here by no fault of your own. We should staple a green card to every one of your diplomas." And then he will bring in ICE agents, and he will say, like, everyone needs to leave this country, including the Dreamers, who, by the way, might still be around if you want to deport them. And it doesn't make sense.
They're out on the driveway. Yeah.
Yes, until you understand that he is I guess I would say a lot of his strategy, to your point, is sort of, it's visceral and it's instinctual, but it is not like a 10-point plan.
No, I think it's important to understand that there's no strategy, but as you say, he wants, in any given moment, he wants to win.
Yeah.
So he wants to win the conversation with Zelensky, or he wants to win the argument with the Australian journalist, and it doesn't really matter who it is. He just has to emerge the victor, and that's why it all seems so disjointed. I agree with that.
I want to give a shout out to our colleague David Graham, who pointed out something about this that I think was brilliant. The part of this, I have to win the moment. It's amazing, and until David mentioned it, I hadn't really thought it through. This is why he never denies or rejects a hypothetical, because he doesn't want to have an argument about it. He wants to say it's possible. Mr. President, are you going to, turn the Washington Monument into, a Lego set? We're thinking about it. We're looking at it.
2 weeks. We'll let you know in 2 weeks.
2 weeks.
Right, 2 weeks.
So, but to this, I think all this is a great conversation. He's certainly, though, he hates being humiliated too, right? He hates, that's a real fear of his. And I remember covering his speech at just up the road here at the UN General Assembly a couple of years ago, where the audience, the leaders of the world, actually laughed at him. He made some comment about how the U.S. had never been better, and people in the room laughed, and you could tell how upsetting that was to him. He's being humiliated on a daily basis by Vladimir Putin. Why is he not doing anything about it?
How much time do we have?
You knew we'd get there.
No, everybody has their explanation. My explanation is the one that doesn't require any secrets. I think it's just money. He has a long, his companies have a long business relationship with Russia. He had made money out of Russian investors into his condos for many, many years. Steve Witkoff says that what he's doing in Moscow is negotiating business deals. We hear wisps and rumors of what those deals might be, and there are various supposedly in the works. I can't confirm that, and I think he's expecting some payoff. I could be wrong, and maybe there is some other deeper secret, but I think it's always best to guess at the most obvious thing. This is what he's interested in. This is when he thinks of Russia, he thinks of a place that has a lot of money. It's helped him before, and that, I think, is the simplest explanation.
And Tolu, Tom, a moment ago, painted a pretty grim picture of U.S. soldiers on the streets ahead of the midterm elections. And I think there's going to be a national conversation. I think at least those of us, the midterms are looming. And I think a lot of what is fueling some of Trump's actions are because of that. This is a need to hang on to power, because he knows if the Democrats even get one House of Congress, well, they have the power of the subpoena, investigations come back, even potentially another impeachment, though he, of course, wouldn't be removed from office. And that is something that he just can't stand. So we're seeing the idea of redistricting. We're seeing him trying to control the Fed. We're seeing the National Guard on the streets. Talk to us about how you are going to be viewing what arguably will be one of the most consequential midterms this nation's had in a very long time.
Yeah, it gets back to this issue of fear. We talk about all the things that Trump does to sort of instill fear in other people as a leverage point, but he also is a man who has deep fears. He was deeply embarrassed by his first two impeachments, by the investigations that stemmed from them, by the fact that he was on the cusp of being convicted of multiple crimes. He was convicted of multiple felonies here in New York, but he was on the cusp of potentially even being imprisoned. And so he has the fear of those types of investigations, and he is pulling out all the stops to try to rig the upcoming midterm elections to prevent the Democrats from being able to seize any power that could exploit those fears. He's someone who cares a lot about having validation, having the news cycle constantly in favor of him, having members of Congress constantly in power talking about how great he is. If you turn that gavel over to Democrats, they're going to have a lot of that news cycle, a lot of that power of attention, and they're going to use it to investigate what he's been doing. And I think it's important to mention that with all the things that we've seen from this president, we've seen him and his family rake in billions of dollars from these, for lack of a better word, corrupt deals that have allowed them to sell crypto and exploit even some voters who have bought meme coins and whatnot. And those are the kinds of things that will be investigated if Democrats take power. And there's a lot of fear in the White House and among Trump's allies that would be the change that could take place if they don't win this election.
So Ashley, we only have a couple moments left. What are some of the, to piggyback off of Toluse's point there, what are some of the things that you're looking for in this next year and change? And that includes this ridiculous ballroom that he's building outside of the White House.
Yes, lots of gold. But
So much gold.
I mean, I'm looking at, they very early on in the White House, we went in, we were talking to top people there, and to Toluse's point, they do not want to turn this over to Democrats. And so they are very concerned with keeping together the coalition that helped elect Trump, right? Someone told me that's why it was so important that we got Tulsi Gabbard as DNI. That's why it was so important that we got RFK. So we had all the MAHA people. And so they are desperate to turn these people who are not really Republicans, who are Trump voters, into Republicans. And so one thing I'm going to be watching is if they can do that in the midterms elections when Trump is not on the top of the ticket. And he certainly has a huge role in the primaries. He can instill fear. He can play in that. But no one can be Trump. We have seen poor imitations. Marco Rubio played at it in 2016. DeSantis played at it. And so I am so curious how that Trump power and that Trump coalition translates when Trump is not on the top of the ticket.
Yeah, because we know that it didn't in the midterms in 2018. When his name was not on the ballot, Republicans did not turn out in the same way. And now we're going to see that again in 2026 and 2028. Maybe. We think. That's time. That flew by. We really appreciate you all being here. Enjoy the rest of the festival. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.